How's it going, guys? So recently I had a comment in my comment section of the recent book reading I did, and somebody asked me my opinion on the Varg Paganism Explained books. And they're these little booklets that you can buy for $5 or $6, I think they are. I think I bought mine on eBay, and I got free shipping with them. And they're pretty good little booklets. This one here is 50 pages long. Yeah, 50 pages long. This is the part 1, Thrymskviđa. This is the one that goes over the story of Thor having his hammer stolen by the giant Thrymr, and what he has to do to get it back. Now, the book is written by Varg and Marie, and it has an intro section here, which is what I'm going to be reading today. There's several things they go over quickly to get out of the way. There's an introduction, there's what the gods are, and the science of patterns, and it's pretty short. And then it gets on to the poem itself. And the poem is in the traditional Old Norse, the original Old Norse, as well as an English translation. Excuse me. There's some allergies going on lately. Anyways, so I'm going to go ahead and get into it here. The initial notes reads, "My contribution to this, the first one in a series, have mainly been to translate the Norse stanzas, to find the etymological meaning to some of the different names, and to write the English text. The Maieutic itself is mainly the work of my wife Marie." The first thing they go over here is shadows dancing on the wall. Imagine that you are a child again, and you still believe in Santa Claus. When your parents tell you about the Yule traditions, you see them from a perspective of a child. Innocent, but also ignorant. When you grow older, you understand that there is no Santa Claus. Then you see reality. You have passed a test. You have turned around and now can see what was causing the shadows on the wall in front of you to dance. Our mythologies must be understood in this light. The purpose is not to make people believe in fictional entities and fantastical events. The purpose is not to make people believe the shadows dancing on the wall are real. The purpose is to educate and to distinguish the wheat from the tares. This explains the purpose of our mythology, but also explains why the tradition of our forebears was replaced by Christianity and, some places, Islam. The Native European tradition was a system of tests, and only the best would pass those tests and become initiated. When the Native European man diminished because of the domestication of animals, agriculture, and later civilization, fewer and fewer Native Europeans were able to pass those tests. And to more and more of them, their tradition remained a belief in Santa Claus. Before we continue, let me explain briefly why and how the domestication of animals, agriculture, and later civilization diminished the Native European man. In short, this brought an easier life, and a much more comfortable life. The natural selection that the nomadic hunter-gatherer's lifestyle had ensured was removed. Life became too easy and too comfortable, and the Native European man began to domesticate himself. This auto-domestication in turn led to a dramatical lowering of the intelligence level of the Native European man. Because of that, auto-domestication, gradually, over time, more and more Native Europeans failed to turn around and see what caused the shadows to dance on the wall in front of them. Even in the classical antiquity, the Native European tradition had lost almost all meaning to this vast majority of Native Europeans. To the vast majority of Native Europeans. It offered close to nothing to them. The majority had become too simple-minded to discover its deeper meanings. Thus, when Christianity arrived, it was possible to replace the native European tradition. The average man still believed in Santa Claus, so to speak, and thus could be duped, bribed, threatened, or forced to accept a new faith, with promises that were much more attractive than that silly belief in Santa Claus. The new faith from the desert had little real content, too. It had the depth of a shallow bathtub, so the native European man kept his native European traditions, even though he had officially accepted a new faith. Therefore, we see today a Christianity so steeped in pagan traditions, celebrating pagan high festivals and pagan gods and goddesses as saints, like the well-known Santa Claus. And incorporating pagan myths, songs, stories, and even ideals. Because of that, we are even today able to explain the native European tradition from A to Z. And this is an interesting point that Varg makes. I'm assuming all of you are familiar with his work, The Thulian Perspective, that you can still find. His channel got deleted, but you can still find some of his works here on BitChute. You can find some on YouTube, re-uploads. You can find them on archive.org, and they're great to go through. I still haven't even seen all of them. He did so much work. But here we go on to Maeutics. Maeutics, a term for midwifery, is here a name for a Socratic method of giving birth to minds. Maya, a native European goddess, is the midwife helping the mother give birth, and we intend with these books to help give birth to minds by unveiling the secrets of our forebears. Before any Maeutics can begin, though, we need to cut through the crap that has been firmly placed in between us and our own heritage by the Christians and the scholars. Ever since the beginning of the Christianization of Europe, the intentional falsification and Christianization of our heritage has poisoned the well of knowledge. This poisoning continued during and after the Renaissance, which was a revival of our own heritage, and even into modern times. Whatever was written by our forebears was interpreted in a Christian light. Whatever was found from the pre-Christian era was analyzed from a Christian perspective. Example given, even though our forebears from all over Europe tell us plain and clear that they believed in reincarnation, the Christians interpreted the myths and traditions and graves and tales as if our forebears believed in a heavenly afterlife. Also, the European deities were looked upon like the Christians view their own Hebrew God. But our forebears did not believe that the dead brought with them all the things they buried, or were buried with, to some heavenly afterlife. Their deities were not anything like the Hebrew God. Their myths were not creation myths. Loki was not their devil, and so forth. Even today, the scholars ignore the obvious and well-documented fact that our forebears believed in reincarnation. As we will show you, the evidence is all over our mythology, our myths, and historical records, in archaeology, in songs and traditions. But the scholars refuse to see because they are locked in their Christian perspectives. When they interpret everything from the obviously wrong perspective, then of course, everything they say and write about this becomes nothing short of misinformation. They educate themselves and others to ignorance. They learn and parrot lies. They cover our entire heritage in mud. So before we begin, please let us help you wash away the mud and start with a clean sheet. Unlearn what the scholars have taught you, and be ready to see our heritage for what it is. The Haminga. As we will show you with this book series, to our pagan forebears, the physical death was only the death of a physical shape, and your spirit would keep on existing. Therefore, they talked about Hamhlepa, running in shapes, and Haminga, to walk in shapes. You, the real you, was a spirit, a life, You were a spirit, and life was just a walk in physical shapes. Every time your body died, you would leave it before you were reborn again in a new body. In order for the spirit to return to life, in order for you to be reincarnated, or to be given a new physical body, you had to find back to yourself. This was important because your memories were stored not in any part of your physical body, but in your spirit. So finding back to yourself was not just about returning to life, but mainly about remembering past lives, past experiences. It was about remembering what you knew before. Now, how useful would not that have been if you could remember what you knew and learned in previous lives? Instead of having to start every life on bare ground, you could build on from where you had left in the previous life. As we will show you with this book series, our myths, our fairy tales, and our whole tradition therefore revolves around this concept of finding back to yourself. The science of patterns. As you will see, our forebears knew a lot more than people today give them credit for. They even knew things that we today are only able to know because of modern science. Many will not accept what we say in our books because of that. How could they know? Well, they knew because they understood that we were part of nature and not above it, like Christians tend to think. And they studied the patterns of nature. Thus, they could understand that, say for example, liquids run through the branch of a tree because they look like the blood vessels of our body, and like the rivers in the valley below. Same pattern, same function, same pattern. They could further, for example, understand that the bear mates in the spring and summer, but does not have a developed fetus until after it starts to hibernate, which is around Halloween. And regardless of the moment of mating, they all give birth to their cubs at the same time, which is around Yule. They could see that the fat she-bears had many cubs and the others few or even none. So they could understand that the she-bear could freeze the embryo and later decide how many she would develop based on how much fat she had on her body. You don't need a microscope to understand that. You can simply just observe nature and use your head. And that is what they did. That is how they were able to understand so much. Gods and goddesses. Our forebears believed in spirits, and reincarnation naturally comes into conflict with what the Christians and scholars tell us about their deities. Not because there is a real discrepancy there, but because what they tell us is simply not correct. The Christians and scholars know only the belief in Santa Claus, and they do their best to misrepresent that. And we end up with an image of pagans thinking that the gods rode through wagons in the sky and ripped one eye out and threw it into a well, or with talking severed heads and beautiful goddesses sleeping with dwarves, or eight-legged horses born by a god with magic hammers, and men turned into stone by the gaze of Medusa and so forth. They even go look for a real historical city called Troy. Because they have not understood anything, their entire effort is based around locating where Santa Claus lives, so to speak. So, starting with this little booklet, we will systematically unveil the deities of our ancestors, show their nature, show their purpose, show their meaning, and show their true European tradition. We begin with Thrymskviđa, but we will try to cover as much as we can find time for in this life. Because our Native European heritage is pan-European, with only flavor differences from north to south and east to west, we will talk about fairy tales, myths, traditions, songs, and archaeological finds from all over Europe, and sometimes even from beyond, to areas where Native Europeans used to live in the past. On the following pages you will find Thrymskviđa in both Norse, the language it was recorded in, and English. and in the end you will find an interpretation by my wife. And the book goes on to the poem, and then it goes on to the summary by Marie. It's a good little booklet. Like I said, I paid like $6 for it, I think, and it was a great buy. Can't really go wrong with it. Now, one thing I want to say about the idea that the pan-European belief system could be drawn on to kind of cobble this together, I think it's a really good idea, something to keep in mind, because what may be lost in, say, Germanic mythologies, pantheons, and beliefs may be found in, say, Baltic beliefs. And I think that with this understanding, with the ability to bring these puzzle pieces together, so to speak, we could find a way to cobble together a very good understanding, a new mythology, so to speak, of these things. And I think that that's very valid to do. I think that's a very understandable thing to do. And with that said, I also believe that these mythologies are not going to be resurrected. They're going to be reborn. They're not going to be brought back from a rotten corpse like Lazarus. They will be reborn. Like the beliefs themselves had the belief of reincarnation and being reborn. And I think that's something to keep in mind for people who study these things. It's a very valuable perspective to have. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you guys consider buying one of those books. Like I said, $5 or $6 on eBay. Buy it now on eBay with free shipping. So, I mean, you can't really go wrong with that. But anyways, that's my reading for you guys today. I was going to read the next chapter from Our Traditions, but it's getting kind of late out. You can't really tell, but I think it's about 9 o'clock right now. And I have to work in the morning. I originally read what I just read previous, but my camera on my phone had filmed me upside down, and it didn't show that on the display screen. So anyways, we'll get to that in the next few days here. There's still several days. There's like just like a week before the next event, so I'm going to take the time to put that out before the actual event happens. So anyways, yeah, let me know what you guys think, and hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you guys are all staying safe and staying healthy, and thank you for watching. Be well. Mm-hmm.